right, our 482nd Imagine Buffalo program and our 104th virtual Imagine program hosted by our wonderful Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thank you for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN as I pronounce it, the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, you can type it into the chat box and we'll go through those questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channels, and we hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker, Anna Kaplan. Anna came on as Graycliff's third executive director in December of 2019. She comes to Graycliff with great entrepreneurial expertise after building and growing two businesses over the past 6 years. Anna Kaplan Contemporary, formerly BT&C Gallery, a private gallery project owned and operated by Kaplan, and Resource Art, a collaborative art consultancy with two other Western New York gallerists. Both have drastically changed the cultural landscape in the greater Buffalo, New York area. Anna holds a Master of Arts in the history of decorative arts, design history, and material culture from the Bard Graduate Center, and a BA in art history and Italian studies from Brown University. Anna's former curatorial assistant at the Albright Knox Art Gallery, soon to be called the Buffalo AKG, or presently called the Buffalo AKG Art Museum, where she also was project manager of the major multi-venue regional exhibition Beyond in Western New York, 2007. I remember that exhibit. She is also a former adjunct professor in Damon College's Visual and Performing Arts Department. Through her work in the cultural sector, Kaplan has a track record as a strong collaborator in the Western New York visual arts community, and now brings those relationships to Graycliff. So now, let's hear an update of Graycliff from its third executive director, Anna Kaplan. Anna, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for that introduction and also for the invitation to speak today. It really is a pleasure to be included in this program. And thank you to those who are tuning in live and for those that will watch the recording. Let me share my screen. All right. So today I'm going to focus my presentation firstly on a brief overview of the layers of Graycliff's history, which include not only Frank Lloyd Wright and the Martin family in Western New York, but the landscape architect Ellen Biddle Shipman and the second owners of the property, a group of Pierced Fathers. I'll walk you briefly through Graycliff Conservancy's restoration journey and then bring us around to where we are today. I'll give you a sneak peek of what's on the horizon for our future vision, as well as our current programming and happenings, of course, with the hope that you will make the trip out to Graycliff at some point in the future. So starting from the beginning of our history, Graycliff was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1926, which is what you see here on the left. On the right is what the property looked like when the Graycliff Conservancy acquired it, formed and acquired it in the late 90s, and then where we are today. We operate as a historic house museum For all intents and purposes, we are now fully restored, and we aim to present an experience of the property that is similar to what the Martin family experienced in the 1930s. I'd like to start with a bit of a touchstone to the Martin House in Buffalo. While we are two separate organizations, we do have this very unique shared history. We were designed by the same architect for the same family. And together we represent this kind of deeper dive into our shared history. I have yet to find a comparable example of two publicly accessible sites, both designed by an architect of the caliber of Wright for the same family. So it really is a very unique opportunity, very special opportunity to be able to experience both sites. Graycliff was designed about 20 years later as the Martin family summer home. And here are images of Isabel Martin. Our property was Isabel's. We think of Isabel as really the matriarch of our property, and that also sets us apart from the Martin house. Darwin Martin, when he acquired the property and started communicating with Frank Lloyd Wright, who at this point was a friend, someone who he'd known and invested in for over 2 decades. He identified his wife Isabel as the client of prominence, and she was the one who would steer the design decisions and also enjoy the property the longest. She continued to summer in the property long after Darwin Martin passed. We have joked with the Martin House about advertising as his and hers. So we are hers. This is a drone shot. It's actually from a few years ago. So the property does look a little different now, but I like to use it because it gives a good sense of how we're situated atop this cliff on Lake Erie. We are an excellent example of Wright's concept of organic architecture. This was something that he was striving to define for the entirety of his career. The lake is so very integral to his design for Graycliff, as is the position atop the cliff. What I like to do is explain that the Martin House is an iconic, excellent example of Wright's prairie style in his career. And I would argue that the design for that complex would be successful virtually anywhere flat-ish. It would be just as remarkable. Graycliff is very site specific. It definitely combines elements of Wright's prairie style, but it's not a prairie style house. And again, it's all about the natural environment. It's about the lake. It's about fusing the interior and exterior experience into one. When you come out to Graycliff, before you get to the house, you stop right here at these original pillars. And from here, you can see that this original road really positioned one to focus on the lake before the architecture. And when you get a little closer, you can see that there's this amazing transparency that Wright achieved through these ribbon bands of windows, and also this pond is really important for that conceptual connection to the lake. We are atop this 65-foot Graycliff. The top layer is Tichenor limestone, and when it falls to the ground, it fractures into these diamond shapes. This was a shape that Wright picked up on and repeated throughout his design for Graycliff. This is something that he often did in his designs. He would have a repeating geometric pattern. So at Graycliff, there's the use of the diamond. There's also an octagon and an L shape that's repeated and part of Wright's grammar for the property. There is no stained glass at Graycliff, unlike the Martin House. One of the reasons for that was budget. Another reason is that there was an emphasis on letting as much natural light in as possible. But we do have this really wonderful, iconic diamond-shaped window. So that there's still this real elegance and beauty to the design, even without the formal decorative qualities like stained glass. This Tichenor limestone that I mentioned that is from the top of the cliff, Wright actually harvested a lot of that stone from our site and used it in the architecture of the two houses that make up Graycliff, as well as those pillars that I showed you and stone walls. These rocks are very special for a couple reasons. First, what you can see here, and I'm actually not sure if you can see my cursor, but in this larger image to the left, there's a fossil. The more time you spend at Graycliff, the more these fossils make themselves visible. Wright was very aware of this, and it gives this amazing texture and character to the site. There's also this kind of rust leaching out of the rock that is iron oxide, and something that, again, Wright was very aware of, and it complements his autumnal palette really well. Over here on the right are Isabel and Darwin Martin. As you can see, they designed with Wright and enjoyed this property later in their life. 1928 was the first summer that they moved in, and there were some changes that happened after that summer. Darwin Martin would pass in 1935, and Isabel would continue to summer on the property until the early 1940s. This is in comparison to the Martin House complex, the first building of which was finished in 1906. This other couple that you see on the left, this is Dorothy Martin and her husband, James Foster, and their two kids, Derry and Margaret. So the Foster nuclear family would also summer on the property. And I love how this layer to our history involves children. Margaret and Derry enjoyed their summers out at Graycliff through their teens, and we happen to have this connection still to this family. Derry is still with us. He's in his early 90s now. He's born in 1930, and he last visited this past summer, actually, to celebrate the life of his sister Margaret, who passed in 1921. So this is just very special. Here's Derry sitting in that very spot that he did as a child. So it's just really wonderful that we still have that direct connection to the family. And because of that relationship, we've been able to acquire objects that we know were part of the Martin family's experience. We happen to have all these wonderful historic images of the interior of the main house. That's not what we're looking at right here. The main house is over here. The first floor only. So how we've interpreted the second floor and how we've interpreted what you're looking at here, which we call the Foster house, is all based on the images we have of the first floor of the main house, as well as the family's memory and the objects that they've donated us. So what we're looking at here, as I mentioned, we call it the Foster house. It was originally designed to be a garage on the first floor, and on the second floor there's an apartment that was for the chauffeur and his family. And there's also a room in there with a sink that was to be for the gardener. After 1929, the Foster family, this is where they would live. So that's why we call this the Foster house. And I should mention that the third structure, which you can kind of see here, is a heat hut. That's what we call it. It was designed by Wright to house the boiler system as a fire preventative measure. So the next layer of our history involves landscape design architect Ellen Biddle Shipman. She is an under-recognized figure who was quite prominent in her day, and I've been very much enjoying digging into her history and working towards increasing scholarship on Shipman, and helping to just raise her visibility in general. I'm really grateful to have her as a piece of our history, because while she was incredibly prolific, designing something like 400 executing something like 400 garden designs all across the United States in her day. And she was definitely very much appreciated in her day. Her work is not visible any longer because most of that work that she did was for residential properties, just like the work she did at Graycliff. And it's just not publicly accessible if it survived. What Ellen's contribution to Graycliff is that she took Frank Lloyd Wright's plan for the landscape, which is what you see here. This was Wright's design. Shipman was hired in 1929 to essentially detail what Wright had started. We have access to these primary source materials that are at Cornell for the most part. And I visited about a year ago now and was able to look at these in person. And this is something that I love to see. This is Ellen Shipman's stamp on Frank Lloyd Wright's original design for the property, showing that she received it in November 1929. And then this is a really wonderful moment of Shipman and Wright together in this primary source where Shipman wrote in graphite atop Wright's plan, noting how she was going to change it. For example, this pond, she wrote, "Take this out." And she was following Isabel's instructions. Wright included this pond as part of his design. Isabel wasn't interested in keeping it. And actually, so you can see that it came out in the early 1930s. And I should mention that when the restoration process started, the pond was deemed really essential to Wright's design. And the date of significance chosen was a date where the pond still existed. So here you can see how the pond really communicates with the larger body of water beyond the main house, which is, of course, Lake Erie. And conceptually, it allows you to imagine this water almost flowing through the house. The picking garden or picking border at Graycliff is what you see here. This is part of Ellen Biddle Shipman's contribution to the property, and it was restored in 2017. And in the time that I've personally been at Graycliff, which has now been 3 years, it has just come to life in this amazing way. It is one of my favorite parts of the property, and I highly encourage that you come out to experience it. It starts to get going in the fall. I'm sorry, in the spring, and it really comes to life in May, June, but then it continues to look really wonderful, through the early fall. And this was a garden that supported Isabel's love of floral arranging. She loved flowers. She was known throughout Buffalo for her floral arranging skills. And so this garden allowed her to continue that. Here's a historic photo of that piece of the property. And there's this wonderful sink inside the main house. And the function of this sink was for floral arranging. It's completely separate from the food prep sink. And it was so that Isabel could soak the stems of the flowers that she picked in that garden designed by Ellen Shipman. So after the Martin family passed over ownership after Isabel passed in the 1940s, the property was acquired in the early 1950s by a group of Piarist fathers. They were the second owners of the property, and they had the longest tenure. So they lived at Graycliff for nearly 50 years. They made many changes to the property to suit their own needs. But this piece of our history is one that we shouldn't ignore. This is an image of, I believe it's from the 70s. And it shows some of the major changes that the fathers made. They built entire other buildings, including, this building over here to the left, which still exists as our visitor center, and in addition to the foster house. They also, this is the main house that there's a sunken garden on the front facade, which you might not have noticed because I didn't really quite point it out. But what they did was the fathers filled in that space. They added a roof and created this exterior wall in order to allow for this chapel space, which is what you see here. So they really did transform the property, but all of their changes were additive. And that made the restoration process one that was reductive, just removing what the fathers did and restoring it back to the Martin family's experience. Here you can see a volunteer, an early volunteer from the Graycliff Conservancy, who is the newly formed Graycliff Conservancy, who is removing that cement from that sunken garden space. The Graycliff Conservancy was formed in the late 90s to essentially save the property because it was being threatened. It was up for sale and it was being threatened by demolition. The fathers themselves were really interested in seeing the property be restored and be publicly accessible. And so we have a lot to owe to them. They were patient. They allowed for Graycliff Conservancy to find the funding, and that is why we are here today. These people on the left are standing in that space where you saw that person tearing up the concrete, and here on the right is Derry Foster as a child on that same space. So it has now been restored. We are in 2023. Wow, I should have updated that. Forgive me. I'm still in that mode where I'm writing 2022 on everything. Now in 2023, we have arguably come to the end of a decades-long restoration journey that began in the late 90s with those early volunteers, and it recently is finished with a significant investment from New York State, which allowed us to fully restore the interiors. What you're looking at is the interior of the main house. The interior of the foster house is now fully restored. The landscape has been restored in a major way as well, which is what you're looking at here. Even the tennis court has been restored. This is an historic image of the Fosters playing tennis. And then this was the original tennis court, which is actually quite special because it's this dyed concrete that was specified by Lloyd Wright. Just this past summer, we finished up the final phase of this major restoration funded by New York State, an investment of over $3 million. This final phase was stalled for a couple of reasons, pandemic included in that. And it is now complete, but it involved this lakeside of the property. What you're looking at here is an image of a model that we have in our visitor center that shows the property as it would have been in the 1930s. We have lost at least 11 feet of the cliff, maybe as many as 15 feet due to erosion. I should mention that this was built as the Martin family's summer home, and that meant that they had access to the lake, to the beach. They actively used this stair tower. This recent restoration effort involved restoring this stone bench that's at the end of this area that we call the esplanade on our lakeside lawn. These are historic images of this bench. We had to make some tough decisions because of those many feet of cliff that have been lost over the years due to erosion. We can never get back, to these historic images. So we had to change the proportions, obviously, when we reinstalled this Wright design stone bench. But I'm so glad that we did, because what it does is it really defines this space as essentially an exterior room, and it gets us closer to Wright's original vision for the property. And so this is what it looks like today. So for those of you that might not have been out to Graycliff in a while, I really encourage you, because it does look a lot different. We removed several trees, opened up the view, and this bench is just truly spectacular. So I've been talking for a while, but I just want to breeze through some, Dennis, if it's okay with you, give a sneak peek of our vision for the property.
Great. That was going to be my first question. Where do we go from here?
Yep. Where do we go from here? Right now, we are in the quiet phase of a capital campaign for this really exciting project that involves the 6 acres of the site that are yet to be improved. That's the approach, that's the parking area, and that's our visitor center. So what you see here is a rendering of this project. It also involves restoration of historic natural assets that the Martins enjoyed, like an orchard, vegetable garden. This entire area that is now our parking area was wildflower fields. We can't afford to completely reinstall them because we need to have parking, but we're going to be creatively designing that space to reference these wildflower fields and get back to a more faithful interpretation of what the Martins experienced. This is our current visitor center, which, as I mentioned, is the last standing building that the fathers added to the property. It's been really useful for 20 years now, but we have definitely outgrown it. And the new design does incorporate the footprint. It involves this selective demolition approach, so it retains access to that important part of our history that involves the fathers, but it updates it so that it's a much better first impression and visitor experience for our many guests. Lastly, what's going on now? I have to mention that we have collaborated with the Buffalo AKG Art Museum, formerly the Albright Knox, to install an exhibition of contemporary sculpture on our site. It's really exciting. We've never done anything like this before. It was installed this past July, and it is the interior piece of it, which is what you see here, is only up through March 19th. So we do have art tours that run every Saturday now. And you can also see the art when you come on a normal guided tour. It just won't be the focus of your tour. So I encourage you to get out to experience this while it's still there. I do want to mention that we are open year round for tours. Even though we were designed as a summer home, a winter experience is just as inspiring. We have a winter tour that runs Friday through Saturday now through March, and it allows you access to both floors of the both floors of the main house at a reduced rate. So it's an excellent opportunity to get upstairs if you haven't been, and to also have a more intimate experience because our tour attendance is usually much lower. And then lastly, I definitely just want to pitch our market, which is summer programming. It's free and open to the public Thursday evenings, 9 weeks this year. It's an expanded schedule, the longest we've ever run the market. You can come out and have a more casual interaction with the property, shop vendors. There's music, there's food, and you can also have a self-guided tour of the first floor of the main house when you come out. We are from my house, I live near the Peace Bridge. It is 25 minutes max from my house. And it's a lovely drive. So I just encourage you to make the trip at some point in the near future. And here's our website for those of you that are interested in learning more. And I can now take any questions. Thanks, Dennis.
You're welcome. And thank you for a great visual treat for all of us that live in the area that may not be aware of how much a completed project this is after struggling with it for several years, knowing some of the people that wanted to restore it and going way back to those question marks. What a great accomplishment. And you've answered the question that I did have. Where do we go from here? I'm real quick. I'm a lot of the vision of restoring both the Martin House, was that there is a core of people from around the world that want to see Frank Lloyd Wright finished products, if you will. And as you pointed out, these are for the same family to have two distinct properties from a different era, the first decade and the second decade of the 20th century, is unique. Have you found that you're attracting people from well out of the area and that they're doing and seeing both houses?
Yes, definitely. With regards to demographics, though, I'd have to say that, with the pandemic, our demographics did change. We saw greater visitation from local visitors, immediately local, Buffalo, Hamburg, as well as just countywide. But in past years, pre-pandemic, we saw as much as 55% of our visitation from outside of the state, which is impressive.
Yep.
And we're definitely working with the Martin House to try to attract visitors who want to see both properties. And we're also working with our other Wright colleagues. Visit Buffalo Niagara has come up with this really brilliant marketing initiative called the Great Wright Road Trip. And if you Google that, it'll bring you to VBN's website, which has some suggested itineraries that involve not only Western New York. And so that is Graycliff and the Martin House as the really anchor historic sites, but there are also, a small handful of interpretive Wright sites, and that includes the filling station at the Pierce Arrow, Blue Sky Mausoleum at Forest Lawn, the Fontana Boathouse, and then it connects us to our Southern Pennsylvania Wright colleagues. That's Falling Water and Polymath Park and Kentuck Knob right around there. But also now there's this new site in Erie, Pennsylvania, the Hagen History Center. And that's Wright's late 1950s San Francisco office that he shared with Aaron Green. And so if you haven't heard about this, it might be difficult to wrap your head around how they accomplished that. And I won't get into it, but I highly recommend you look into it and seek it out. It's situated to, right on the way between us and Falling Water, and it's really worth a trip, whether it's a day trip or slightly longer because you want to loop in Falling Water. It's definitely worthwhile.
No, that's a new addition. Kate, do we have any questions? We've gone over a little bit, but This is a very special program, so bear with us here.
Yeah,
Folks,
we have several questions. We have several questions actually. The first one is there still a beach access point for Graycliff?
That's a good question. There is not. As part of this recent restoration effort that involved our lakeside lawn, the stair tower, the original stair tower was removed. It was not safe. And we have investigated maybe erecting a facsimile and reinstalling it. We aren't currently interested in that just because of it being cost prohibitive, and the viability with the continued erosion is unclear, but it's certainly a possibility in the future. But short answer, no, there's no current beach access. Actually, there's no current beach either. I should mention that because of erosion, when you are down there at the base of the cliff, which I have been, because we have access through our neighbors, there is not a beach. There's nothing like what the Martin family experienced, which was, you know, a pretty significant sandy beach.
Here's another question. When updates are made to the property, where does the Graycliff get the original plans from? Were they left in the house?
So we do have access to primary source material for the house. And a lot of that is at UB. Some of it's at the Avery Library. So we're fortunate to have access to that. But sometimes the information for a restoration is actually in the existing house itself. For example, the stucco restoration, you know, over the decades, the fathers that lived there, and I'm sure the Martin family also they contributed to this as well. The stucco was repaired, it was painted, it was changed. And it was not in good shape, you know, when the restoration process started. But the closets were never touched. So the closets were accessible, and that's where we were able to take original stucco and come up with a formula for the restoration effort. And when it comes to the landscape design, that's an entirely other beast. You have to make choices, obviously, based on what varietals of plants exist. You know, some of the plants that were identified and used, you know, in 1929 don't exist anymore or are harmful for whatever reason. Also, you have to know that the plants will continue to grow. So by the tennis court, for example, there were several pine trees that were planted to serve as a sort of screen. Well, you know, almost 100 years later now, those trees have matured and no longer function that way. So just some things to keep in mind with when you're talking about landscape and how to approach restoration. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. What are your open hours for the Thursday night events that you mentioned?
Thank you. Thanks for asking that. So our market, it's 5 to 8 p.m. It starts July 20th and it goes all the way through September 14th, I believe, 5 to 8 p.m. So you can just show up and walk the property, experience it all, and you have the opportunity to also enter the first floor of the main house. That is free for members and for children 17 and under, and it's only $10 for everyone else. So I highly encourage you to come out on a market evening. It's a great opportunity to just spend some more time in the gardens or in the first floor of the main house, you know, at your own pace, look at things, linger, and also experience all the, you know, fun and entertainment that we have through the market.
We have a couple more questions if you have time.
Sure.
Is there still an artist, scholar, and residence available at the guest house?
I'm going to say no. We don't, the house, the foster house is not equipped for us to be able to offer a residency program. But if there is an artist, and maybe the person who asked this question is interested in getting involved with us, I encourage you to reach out to me directly. I'm curious what you might have in mind, and maybe we can work something out. I've also noticed that our colleagues at the Martin House just announced a formal residency. That's very exciting. And that information is available through their website, which is martinhouse.org, I believe.
Thank you. And then the last question is, when is construction for the visitor center planned?
Our goal is to break ground later this year in the fall. So we are hard at work finding funding. And if you have any ideas, if you want to reach out about supporting this project or learning more, let me know. It's really a both exciting and critical project for us, and I'm excited to see it to fruition.
The visitor center addition is a major one, certainly for the Martin House, and wish you equal success in finding the right architect and the right design to complement the entire space. Toshika Mori was the architect for that visitor center, and it really added, I think, to the property a great deal.
Oh, yes, for sure. And we're actually working with HHL. They're based here in Buffalo. They've also been involved with the Martin House, and they've been involved with Graycliff. They oversaw our very first restoration effort way back when, which is exciting to be continuing to work with them. Different people at the table now, but just as solid of an architectural firm. They partnered with Situ. They're based in Brooklyn, and they have museum-specific experience that involves creative interpretation. For example, they worked with the Brooklyn Museum, and we're just really excited to work with both teams. And we have Bayer Landscape Architecture. They're based in Rochester, and they're working on the landscape piece of this, which is significant.
Good. And you've got winter hours and an exhibit that's coming down again in early March. That's worth seeing. I saw it last fall, and it's a nice compliment. And I hope it's an ongoing partnership with the AKG art.
Dennis, I'm so glad you had the opportunity to experience it. It's a new way to experience the property. It also is a new perspective on Sarah Brayman's art. So it's a nice dialogue, and it's temporary. I really appreciated the opportunity to allow for a new layer of experience, because we do struggle with repeat visitation, and it's something we're going to have to keep working on.
Yep, you're a great venue, so keep that relationship going like that, and I'm sure develop others. And that's the future. Our theme is to imagine Greater Buffalo as a premier North American cultural and nature center, and you are a anchor tenant in that theme, I would argue, along with the Martin House and the AKG.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
You're welcome, and thank you for a great, concise program, and again, beautiful images to whet our appetite for the beauty of our area, Okay, so folks, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you can come back next week. If you don't know Angela Keppel's work, look her up on the internet, on her website. Her topic will be discovering Buffalo one street at a time. She's become known for that. And we're also going to have Sarah Augsburger. Sarah organizes with the Buffalo History Museum the Augsburger Award, and Angela was the recipient of that this past fall at the Red Jacket, the annual Red Jacket dinner at the History Museum, Buffalo History Museum. So that concludes our session. Thank you again, all, and hopefully see you next week. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well, and good day.
Thanks so much, Dennis.
You're welcome, Anna. Well done.